For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome. My guest today is another Capitol Bureau Chief, Colin Campbell of WUNC, and my colleague in the Capitol Press Corps. Thanks for being on, Colin.
Great to be back.
And we are kind of a crossover episode. Of course, you used to work here at the NNO, and myself and others from our politics team are on WUNC plenty. So one of the reasons I wanted Colin on for our listeners is that I've been covering the legislature for over 6 years now, and you've been, what's your count
I think this
now?
is like 11 years. I started in 2014 covering politics for the NNO.
So it's been really different and kind of not the way we thought it would be. The two major changes, of course, there's a different governor. I'd only covered the legislature when it was Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, Senate Leader Phil Berger, and House Speaker Tim Moore. Berger is the mainstay. Of course, the governor now is Democrat Josh Stein, the former Attorney General, and the House Speaker, Republican House Speaker, is Destin, who had been Rules Chair, and his political rise was pretty steep compared to Setzer, for example, the number two in the House, who's
people have been there for like 2 or 3 decades, and they're still like, it's kind of the just under the top leadership role. Yeah.
So I wanted to, this session has been kind of quiet, but not always. We've had some crazy surprises, like the House Democrats, including Democratic leader Robert Rees, voting with Republicans on the House budget. Now they'll say, and Rees particular said it wasn't with them, it was for the budget, but with is the descriptor of this is a Republican written bill that's generally controversial, and that was a big thing. But probably I guess what's kind of changed a lot of the way session has been is probably Speaker Hall for a variety of reasons. So what's kind of your take on Hall this session?
So I think the big thing that people notice, and you hear it from just about everybody in the building, is, the schedule's changed. We're not doing as many late night sessions. They're often skipping Thursdays, and they just sort of work a 2-day week. And that's some of him recognizing that, we've had this long-standing debate about whether North Carolina should be a part-time legislature or go to full-time, where they pay them more than, $14K a year. They're in session year-round because we are a growing state. And there's never really been enough political momentum to do that, because in the process of doing that, legislators have to increase their own pay, which is going to be politically unpopular. So Hall seems to have gone in the other direction of, if we're going to be part-time, let's legit be part-time so that we can hold down other jobs and not be here all hours of the day, late into the night, every day of the week. And so from the sort of how the place works standpoint, that's been the big takeaway. But on a policy standpoint, it's been interesting because he's come in without any super major policy goals. And some of this is a recognition that Republicans have been charged for a decade now. So they've done a lot of the things they wanted to do, like the abortion restrictions that they passed last session. So we really haven't seen as much sweeping, highly controversial policy. We certainly see a few things on immigration and on guns, but it's just been a little bit more quieter and less contentious than we saw under Moore for the most part.
I think, one thing about Hall's schedule is that two things. One, Berger has kind of made a quip here and there about how the Senate works more than 2 days a week, or they will have voting sessions, or I guess last week they didn't, but they did at least have committees on Thursday. And then this week, I don't know if it's the Senate too, but at least the House, Hall had told, and because of the time of year we're at, that there'll be voting sessions Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then there's another Hall that's a House Republican, Representative Kyle Hall, and he's quipped multiple times in committees that they're on Destin Standard Time.
Yeah, he's apparently late to a lot of things. Yeah.
So I feel it's interesting how the schedule is nice. People know what's going on instead of sort of the flyby, of Speaker Moore. But I don't know if how much of that we really know was Moore's personality versus Hall, since Hall's running the clock a little bit different than he was, that first month or 2 months, I guess.
Yeah, and we'll probably see in the long run. I mean, there's so much still to be learned about Destin Hall. I mean, we haven't had a veto override vote. that's where the speaker really can wield some political power, because if he's really crafty about when do you call a vote when a certain number of lawmakers are absent, it can come across as sneaky for sure, but it's ultimately, when you're in a closely divided legislature, how you can get a controversial bill across the finish line, whether it was that budget vote back in 2019 on September 11th that surprised everyone, or just something, more run-of-the-mill like a gun bill or an immigration bill.
And a lot of those lawmakers are still around. If people aren't familiar with that, there's video, lots of coverage from all of our press corps outlets. It was Representative Deb Butler, who is still in the House, a Democrat, that said,
the "I will not yield" speech.
I feel like things changed after that too. So the way that worked out with the math literally was that all the House Republicans showed up and only a few House Democrats. And the reason for that is because really, again, scheduling. So there are a lot of, the way procedural rules are, there are a lot of skeletal sessions, just these non-voting gavel in and out. And that's even day to day, where the session will start at 9, but the voting session isn't until 11 or at 1 or at 4. And I don't know if we ever really got a clear answer between two people about what time the voting session was.
Yeah, that was one where there was confusion around whether they were going to have a voting session at, I think, 8:30 a.m. or whatever it was on the calendar. And to this day, I don't think there was any sort of conclusive reporting on, was this an honest miscommunication, a misunderstanding between people in leadership and the Democrats, or was this some sort of plot by Republicans to mislead the Democrats and get them not to show up that day?
And it was two people who aren't in the House now, former Republican Representative David Lewis, I believe, is a lobbyist now, and he ended up leaving after getting in trouble with the law.
Yeah, something totally different.
Yeah, and then former Representative Darren Jackson, who was the Democratic leader, who I believe is a judge or had been a judge more recently. So if you all want to tell us, it was something about, do we have votes or not, and how that went. And Lewis at the time was the rules chair. I think that's interesting what you said about the policy on Hall. At the beginning of session, we sort of thought it would be cryptocurrency, and that was just maybe one thing. But immigration, I guess if I had to pick something, I'd say that's his biggest issue.
He's one of the first bills he's filed was about, tougher immigration laws in this state. It's something he talks about a lot, both in terms of his social media presence and what he sort of messages to the public, but also in terms of what he seems to be focused on in his actual day-to-day legislating.
I feel like that's a point we should talk more about. Kind of his social media presence and the way he talks maybe outside of the building is maybe more combative with Democrats, where we're in the building, or at least the legislation that he is shepherding through is something that is more amenable to Democrats. Obviously, so many Democrats majority of Democrats voted for the House budget. And that lies in the policy that was in it. They liked as typically it's happened every budget process, the House wants higher raises than the Senate, and also recognized the worries that people have about these future tax cut triggers, and enough Democrats, were on board with the budget. I don't think all of them are conferees. If you looked at the latest,
it's only a handful, so it's still a very tilted towards Republicans. So the Democrats on that typically don't really have that much of a role. They get the opportunity to sign the conference report at the end of the day, assuming we get a budget deal. But I don't think they'll have a huge impact of that. The budget vote from Democrats, I think, may have been less about Destin Hall, although I think Democrats did really like that he was willing to sort of disagree with Phil Berger on the scheduled income tax cuts and putting those on hold for a time being, but a lot to do with Governor Josh Stein. He met with lawmakers, Democratic caucus, the morning of the vote.
Not that he's ever admitted it, but we know he did.
Yeah, we've heard, you and I have both talked to multiple sources who said that this meeting happened, and I think that was when he basically said, we know we're not going to get everything we want, but if we can get some of the things in the House budget in the final and put what political muscle we may have behind the House budget, that could help us in the long run. And I think that's why you saw so many Democrats be willing to vote for a Republican budget, because that was more Democrats voting for a Republican budget than any other budget since Republicans took the majority 15 years ago.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the budget, about what to expect in these next 2 busy weeks, and Hall and Berger's relationship and interactions. We'll be right back. You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Don Vaughan, here with Capitol Bureau Chief Colin Campbell, who is with WUNC. Before the break, we were talking about House Speaker Destin Hall, Senate Leader Phil Berger, what's different this year with Governor Stein and with Hall, and Berger, who is, I'd say it's beyond just arguably the most powerful politician in the state, really. So what we're seeing is kind of how things are between Berger and Hall, particularly with the budget. So the next 2 weeks we have, on the House side anyway, for sure we know that it's voting sessions Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then we're not quite at the end of June. The end of June is, I believe, the Monday, the following week.
Yeah, but that's 4th of July week, which they almost always take off the whole week.
Right. So we don't have anything specific on dates, but what we do know from talking to Hall and Berger is that there will be a break. Now, there's a chance that the break is a long time, or it might be a couple weeks. And if this sounds familiar, this was sort of the past year's budget process with Berger and former Speaker Moore, where they didn't have an agreement on the budget. So they would go home, come back, talk once a month or not, or less. And that is why the state budgets wouldn't happen until later in the year. And then that's not even including the role that the governor has as far as those final negotiations. So people who are listening, state employees, teachers whose base pay is set by the General Assembly, if you're hoping for raises by July 1st, I wouldn't put money on it.
I think the only possible ray of hope for that is that if they did a mini budget, which I think Speaker Hall said something to the effect last week, that they were looking at that to get those raises moving, recognizing the full budget may be a ways away.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I've been hearing too is it could be the mini budgets, which are kind of these piecemeal budgets of here's just a raises bill, here's just we have these projects in the works funding bill. So basically just parts of an overall budget that, probably doesn't really have any policy spending on it. May there be something with the vacant job cuts, which with both chambers have, or it could be a very just sort of bare bones budget bill passed by one chamber and then thrown to the other, and then we see what happens, what they're going to do with it. So it's sort of what we were saying with how the House and Senate are interacting in Hall and Berger and the other leadership too. It's not just the two of them, but as far as how they want this to play out. But if there is no budget, then what the Senate wants for the tax cuts are just going to be there.
Yeah, I think that's Phil Berger's ultimate trump card here, right? Like if Hall does not cave on making changes to the tax cuts, so they're not able to reach some sort of agreement that where they land in the middle on that, then the Senate's position is probably going to be like, well, we don't want to have a budget because if we don't have a budget, we keep spending at these current levels, and the lower they keep the spending levels, the longer it takes to reach the projected fiscal cliff through the tax cuts, and then you keep the tax cuts in place without changing them. So that seems to be, I think, the biggest dynamic in these budget negotiations that sort of lead us towards expecting either a really long impasse or potentially no budget at all.
Mm-hmm. So what really, like these next 2 weeks, there's and we'll talk a little bit about Stein action on what's already been sent to him. But aside from the immigration and guns bills that are kind of been, big Republican priorities, both Berger and Hall have said they want an elections bill. Now, we could see this elections bill this week or next week, or they could just save it for if they're coming back for something else.
Yeah, and the last few years we've seen, instead of them just finishing a long session and adjourning for months at a time, they do this they call them monthly check-ins where they put an adjournment resolution out where they come back for 2 days in July, 2 days in August, 2 days in September, and maybe they do nothing during those sessions, or maybe that's when they do the budget, maybe that's when they do an election bill. Election bills is something they want to do in the wake of the Jefferson Griffin Supreme Court race and changing some of the rules that came up as a point of contention in that thing. But we only have municipal elections this year, and not even in some of the major towns and cities. Mm-hmm. So they've kind of got till next year in the midterms to figure out how they want to change the rules for elections.
And when we were talking about math and veto overrides and who's in the room, Hall had pointed out, as far as the math isn't there right now for concealed carry, as far as in the House. But then he mentioned, we have a year and a half. So that's a good point, that we're in the long session, that what we're seeing now isn't done if they leave, because there's the short session.
Yeah, nothing is truly dead, even if they go out of town without having done these overrides. They can still come back to that if they twist some Republican arms of the people who voted against this particular gun bill. If Phil Berger makes it a big priority, because that's when he's co-sponsoring it, and it's the sort of thing that he's promoting, in part because he has a primary challenger next year. So we'll see some interesting activities from Berger going into that Republican primary against the Rockingham County Sheriff up in his district.
I feel like the short session is generally like the primary session, and the
everything you can
election.
message on a primary and on a general election, it inherently gets so much more political in an even year.
Yeah. And, the House Republican caucus is already coming for House Democrats, with ads out. And I think that, everyone's starting to look like we're at that time of year, not just that they're hoping for this final budget agreement, if that happens, in the next month or the next 6 months, but really already looking to 2026.
Yeah, no, the election never ends. I saw Phil Berger's already running Facebook ads promoting some of his policy agenda, including the gun bill and some of the immigration bills. So we're definitely seeing that, and seeing a lot more. It's not so much contention in the building, but there's certainly a lot of contention on social media and public messaging that almost makes it seem like they're fighting more than they are when they're actually together in that building.
Mm-hmm. I think like the phrase "touch grass," like you really should. People need to get out of, put their phones down, close their laptop, and, unless you're actual, in session, just go out and interact with people and talk to people, because it really is different. And I felt the same way. Like, I'd been a reporter for a long time, and then going to the General Assembly, switching to state government. And it was not like I thought it would be at all. And it's just different between perception and reality.
Yeah, and we saw that last week with the bill signings at the governor's mansion, where Republican co-sponsors of these different non-controversial pieces of legislation Governor Stein was signing were there to hang out, do the photo op, have the reception. So they get along in person, but if you just look at Twitter or social media, you think they just absolutely hate each other. And some of that, I'm not even sure how much of that they post and how much of that is like their staff who came from a sort of more campaign-oriented PR background, and therefore sort of used to that like attack the other side political messaging.
There's a big difference between campaigning and running for elections and actually governing,
Yeah.
We'll probably see a lot more of like the bipartisan legislation, I feel like, this week and next week. And let me segue to our picks for headliner of the week, which is kind of in the same vein. Colin, so if you go first, what is your headliner?
So I'm going with Josh Stein's veto stamp. It has not been used at all in his first nearly 6 months in office, but I think will be within the next week, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. Perhaps he's already used it on the immigration bills or the gun bill that are on his desk right now.
Well, if we're recording this Monday afternoon, so unless he does it today and they're listening to it Tuesday.
Yeah, he has until the end of the week. So
yeah. And then after that, then we'll see how
effective the veto stamp is, because it wasn't very effective for Governor Roy Cooper the last 2 years after we had the party switching of Tricia Cotham. I don't think he's sustained any vetoes this year. It's looking like it could be harder for Republicans to either get that one Democrat to vote with them, or in the case of the gun bill, get all the Republicans on board with something.
Mm-hmm. And so Stein had a ceremony at the mansion on Friday morning, first thing Friday morning, to sign 3 bills, like you had mentioned, with the bipartisan support. Did not talk to reporters after.
Yeah, that's a break with tradition for those kind of events. Usually the governor takes at least a couple questions.
Yeah, I heard that it was, I think a Washington Post reporter said once, if you don't take questions at a press conference, it's just a live reading of a press release.
Yeah, an infomercial perhaps for whatever you're doing. But yeah, that was he was listed as he's going to sign bills or take action on bills, not even sign bills. So we assumed maybe veto, and it ended up being a trio of non-controversial bills with all the sponsors there. I think some of that was not wanting to talk about the more controversial stuff when he had the kumbaya moment of all the Republicans standing around him. But certainly an unusual break with tradition on having that kind of event and then not taking questions.
Especially if you ask people to come to it. Yeah, we do appreciate that lawmakers that will answer our questions in the hall and we see them. We'll wait for us after session to talk to them, because there's usually plenty to talk about every single day. All right, I'm going to move on to my pick for headliner of the week, which has nothing to do with the legislature. And it is high school graduation season. I know when we had our education reporter on a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, Kern Huey talked about how there would be the flurry of attention because Wake County schools have their graduations downtown, just a block from the NNO here. And I saw, people in mortarboards this morning, and they've been over the weekend. My son and band performed for his high school graduation ceremony. Said they played Pomp and Circumstance over and over and over
There's
again.
a lot of kids in some of those high schools.
So, but it's still, shout out to all the high school graduates as they, move on to the next adventure in life, and all the families, all the teachers and administrators who get a break here for the next couple months until they do it all with the next round of students.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we'll have another busy week at the Ledge. Thank you, Colin Campbell, for being on
Thanks
again.
for having me.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, and with producer Gabby Hartlop. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Sign up for our political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.